you don't necessarily need a big list, depending on a few different factors. Now, you can also make millions of dollars with like 10,000 subscribers because you're selling, digital products or expensive consultation packages or productized services, all that sort of stuff. You don't need 500,000 subscribers to make 6-7 figures in revenue to do that. So it really depends on how you're going to monetize the newsletter.
Dylan, how are you doing?
I'm doing fabulously. Lewis, how are you?
Fabulous is a great update. I'm glad to hear it. I'm also fabulous. Just this morning, I was on a sales call and someone was asking me not just for content advice, but growth advice. And I sent them the link to your 5-day how to get 1,000 subscribers course.
Oh, nice.
I was like, you know what? It's funny. I'm talking to that guy again in a couple hours. So that's how you know it's a real one. So
I love it.
You're someone I've learned a lot from your content about, growth marketing generally, a lot of newsletter niche specific advice. So I'm pumped we're chatting.
Sweet. Yeah, I'm happy to be here and really glad to hear that, one, you've found some of the stuff I've been blurting out on the internet helpful and not just annoying. So that's awesome. And I'm pumped to talk about newsletters in all shapes and sizes and how they can really benefit a business or even a solopreneur, as the term goes.
Yeah. How would you describe what you do right now presently with newsletters? Are you ghostwriting for people? Are you running ads for people? You're doing whatever they need help with as long as it relates to growing their newsletter. Where do you sit in kind of your expertise?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm a little bit of a generalist. I would classify myself as when it comes to newsletters. I've written and published my own, managed the back end ops, sponsorship sales, and all that sort of stuff. And what I guess to put a little bit of a really bow on it, what I'm doing right now is helping people run their newsletters efficiently, create some content for them, and just kind of lend an outside perspective to what they're doing. Because, I know this from firsthand being in writing a newsletter myself is, you're in the weeds, you're in the thick of it, you're doing stuff and you're kind of like, I think this is good. I think I'm on the right track. When you're operating, solo, you don't have like other people watching what you're doing. You don't know necessarily if you're doing the right things, and that outside perspective can be really helpful. So I kind of lend my eyes and ears and attention to newsletter operators and help them kind of, if they have any questions, I help guide them in that route and show them some things that maybe they could be improving upon. And like I said, as well, creating some content for them too, a bit of ghostwriting. And yeah, that kind of sums it up. In terms of paid growth, I'm definitely not like a Facebook ads guy. So I'm not going down that rabbit hole. I've mostly done organic growth. That being said, I have a lot of experience kind of with the paid growth strategy based on my time at Sparkloop, working at Sparkloop for about a year and a bit.
What were you doing on the Sparkloop team?
So I started in customer support there with the plan to move into content. So I helped.
I'm going to pause for a second to explain what Sparkloop does, just real quick,
Sure.
for someone who might not be familiar.
Yeah. So yeah, I was on the Sparkloop team for about a year and a bit. And what Sparkloop does is, if you go to their website, they say they are the number one, I don't want to misquote it, but they say on their homepage, the number one newsletter recommendations platform. And I defer to their homepage because it's kind of hard to explain for somebody who isn't quite in the know. But I'm sure if anybody listening has subscribed to a newsletter in the last 12 months, they have also been presented this widget that pops up that says, hey, since you subscribe to my newsletter, you might also like these newsletters that I recommend checking out. And you can, tick the boxes and then hit subscribe to all, or just select one or two of them or none. And so Sparkloop was one of the innovators when it came to that technology. And people essentially pay, you can do it for free as well, but people essentially pay to have their newsletters put into those pop-up widgets. And then the person who is showing you those widgets will get showing you those newsletters in the widget will get a small commission if you do subscribe to them. So Sparkloop is essentially a network that's connecting people who want to grow their newsletters with people who want to earn money promoting and recommending newsletters.
Amazing.
Yeah. They do more than that too, but that's kind of the main goal they've been going down the last 24 months or so.
Exactly. How did you, at what point did you decide to build your personal brand as the newsletter guy or a newsletter guy, newsletter strategist, because that's like your headline. That's like, if there's a word people are, you want people to associate with your brand, it's newsletter. When did that come about?
So some of your listeners may be familiar with Jay Klaus. They may not. He's more in the creator space, but he's built a really successful business in that niche, in that realm. And I was in one of his communities, and because I was publishing this newsletter and I didn't really have an exact niche that I was publishing to, it was more of a really broad appeal, sort of, again, creator space newsletter. And I often talked about what I was doing to help grow my newsletter and what I was doing to monetize my newsletter within my content. And so another gentleman in the lab by the name of Justin Moore, who runs a few businesses, but one of them is Brand Deal Wizard. He basically said, dude, what you need to do is niche down and focus on newsletters. Like, he's like, your content's good, but like, you're too broad. You can really, I think, accelerate your growth and simplify your messaging and who you appeal to if you just like niche down and focus on newsletters. So I was like, oh, I've kind of been thinking about that, but that was kind of the validation I needed to really make that change. And so once I did that, everything became like way easier in terms of like what kind of content I was going to create, publish, focus on, talk about, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Taking even a couple more steps earlier in the story, you launched a newsletter and you've been keeping it active for a long time. What was the inspiration for you to launch a personal newsletter, and what's been the evolution of that over the years?
Yeah. I have to admit that the last 24 months or so, the last 12 months or so have been definitely a little bit slower. I've only released a couple editions just because of, life and work and that sort of thing. But I started my newsletter called Growth Currency back in early 2021, the one I was just telling you about. And that was just like me seeing, people starting Substacks during the pandemic, and people like basically saying, you better start, building an email list, because who knows what's going to happen with, COVID and all this stuff. So I was like, yeah, that's probably a good idea. And so I started a newsletter, and I just kind of started publishing stuff and collecting email addresses, and people were signing up for the newsletter and seemed to be enjoying it. My open rates were pretty solid, between like 45-50%. And I just kind of ran with it to the point where, like I said, I started making a bit of money, and it was something I was doing on the side during, my off work hours a little bit in the evenings or early mornings. Not much on the weekends, but I was doing it. It was having fun. I was publishing it weekly, so it wasn't a huge burden to do it. Some people do daily. I was doing weekly, so it was manageable. And it got to the point where I considered going full time on it. But the revenue was just a little bit, I was just monetizing mostly by sponsorships, and the revenue wasn't, as anybody who's dealt with sponsorship revenue, it's definitely not super forecastable. You can be, but it's challenging, especially when you don't have a huge audience of hundreds of thousands of readers. So I decided not to go full time with it and just sort of stick with the predictability of a full time job. But it's still been a pursuit that I do not regret, that I've gained so much more out of. I wouldn't have got the job at Sparkloop, for example, had I not started it, right? And I wouldn't be working with the newsletter operators I'm working with now had I not started it. So it just opened so many doors for myself, and even for my family to a degree, because the revenue I've made from it has just kind of been extra money on the side. So it's been beneficial in a lot of ways.
I think that's one of the hidden things that it's gone unsaid, but it's kind of a hidden premise of this conversation is, you started creating content about newsletters because you developed expertise in it. But I think it's just, again, a hidden premise here that you're passionate about the benefits of having a newsletter, kind of regardless of, I don't want to say fully regardless of the life circumstance that you're in, because there's certainly people that I'm like, dude, you don't need a newsletter, you need to go outside. But maybe if someone does go outside and then they do need a newsletter, there's people on the opposite end of the spectrum for sure.
Yeah.
What are some of the reasons, someone comes, I'm sure you get a lot of DMs, right? You have 10,000 followers on Twitter. You put out tweets all the time, benefits of newsletters, interesting content about newsletters. When someone asks you in the DMs, should I start a newsletter? What's your thought process for responding to them?
Yeah. 99.9% of the time I'll say yes. Unless they're like, hey, I want to make like,
you sound like me.
I want to make like a quick buck, essentially, if I get that vibe from them, that a newsletter is not the way to go. One, It will take a little bit of time to ramp it up. Yes, you can grow faster these days if you're willing to inject some capital into growth. But there's a fine balance between growing a newsletter really quickly with, especially with paid growth, versus doing it, with a balanced approach with some organic inflow of subscribers, some specific types of paid growth that you can do versus others. So anyway, I'm going down a bit of a side tangent here, but my point is, like, yes, I would say growing a newsletter, starting a newsletter and growing a newsletter, if you have, an expertise, or if you're, entertaining, or you love like keeping up with current events and informing people on a certain subject, those are all great reasons to start a newsletter. And obviously, if it benefits your business, or you want to make a business out of it, you certainly can if you do have one of those things.
What are some of the things you did wrong at the beginning of your newsletter journey? That there's some beginner mistakes, even if they're intermediate mistakes as well, or there's maybe some obvious ones, like you were just doing some crazy stuff that put it in spam and you didn't know. But like, what other kind of, even that's a good tip too. Don't want to say anti-spam tips. Yeah, half the time when I'm talking to experts in the space, that is half the conversation is just defeating spam. So don't want to disqualify that as interesting and relevant either.
Yeah. And I definitely don't want to position myself as a kind of a spam or anti-spam expert. So I don't want to necessarily go down that path. You certainly do want to look into what you should and should not be doing in that regard.
It does matter.
Yeah, it definitely matters. And there's there's a bunch of acronyms that you can look up to set up like your DKIM and your DMARC and all that stuff. But I guess my point is that is very important. I'm just not going to touch on it because I'm not an expert in it. However, on sort of that same vein, one thing that I think as I went down the newsletter path that I realized I thought I was right on, that I've since changed my mind on, was double opt-ins. So when you sign up to a newsletter, oftentimes you'll get an email in your inbox and it'll say, please confirm your subscription. And so that is a bit of a anti-spam strategy. Now, if you're wanting to grow your newsletter a little quicker, I would advise instead of doing necessarily that double opt-in, because what happens if they don't confirm their subscription, you can never email those people. Even if they signed up, they had all the best intentions to sign up for your newsletter, they wanted to get it, either your confirmation email went into their spam or junk, or just got buried in their inbox and they never got to it and they forgot to go search for it. You can never contact them. You can't email them. So that sucks. And I had a portion of my list. I use ConvertKit for my email service provider, my ESP. And there was like this list, a couple pages long, of people that like I could never email. And I'm not doing really aggressive paid growth. So I know these aren't like spam bots or anything that could maybe come through unfiltered through those channels. So it was just a real bummer to see that. And so what I kind of recommend these days is to try, if you're open to it, try doing your own version of an opt-in, a double opt-in. So yes, you send an email to people, or sorry, you have people opt in, and instead of forcing that double opt-in through the ESP, you actually create your own double opt-in. And as soon as they sign up, they're confirmed, they're on your list. You can email them. But then you send them into an automation that basically is like, hey, they're going to get an email from me. That email is going to say, you signed up for my newsletter. I'm stoked. You should be stoked. Here's the great content. Please click here to confirm that you want to, receive more emails from me. And what that does is gives you the opportunity to send them an email, even though technically you would do that anyway. But it also gives you the opportunity to, send them another reminder email as well, saying like, hey, I noticed you still, if they haven't opened, I noticed you still haven't opened the email yet. Here's kind of the content you're missing. And then what you can do is on your own terms, you can filter those people out. If they just never open, they never click, you can unsubscribe them on your own. And you can automate that whole process to make it a lot easier. So that's the one mistake, a very long-winded answer to your question, but that is the one mistake that I think I made in the beginning that I've since changed my mind on. But that's the first one that comes to mind.
It sounds like a lesson learned painfully, so I can hear you're saving other people the pain.
I think so. And I mean, the whole thing with welcome emails to and onboarding sequences and all that sort of thing is really dependent on, I'm a big proponent of, depending on the channel that people are coming in, you need to obviously tag them, segment them, whatever you want to do properly, and then put them through a specific onboarding flow. If they're coming from, Facebook ads, or if they're coming from the SparkLoop subscriber or paid network that I mentioned earlier, their partner network. Or if you are just getting them organically, like you'd want to send these people through different channels and make sure that messaging is relevant to how they are signing up. Because a lot of people just, businesses, not just people, but businesses have these newsletters and people are signing up in all different kind of capacities. And the messaging for everybody is the exact same. And that's a huge mistake because there's no context. If you signed up through a partner, or if you signed up through a Facebook ad, or a referral, you get this inbox or this email in your inbox and you're like, I don't remember signing up for this, unsubscribe, I'm out. But if there's messaging there saying, hey, this is what, welcome to my newsletter, or our business's newsletter. Here's why you're getting this email, like big, bold,
Exactly.
highlighted at the beginning of your email, and telling people why they are subscribed to your newsletter, why they're getting it, instead of just this sort of like random welcome email that everybody gets. Yeah. It's like, nope, unsubscribe, I'm out. I didn't sign up for this. So I think that's one mistake I still see a lot of people making that I probably made myself in the beginning, but I've since, changed that too a bit.
I love it. Common misconception in the space, on a similar note, is how big of an audience you need for a newsletter to be worth your while. How do you think about that question?
I think about that question with, how are you going to monetize it? What is your revenue strategy? Because that will matter. If you want to monetize it via ads and sponsorships, you'll probably need a bit of a bigger list. How niche is your audience? The more niche your audience, how wealthy is your audience? The wealthier your audience. All of those things, the smaller a list you'll need before you can drive revenue, right? So a good example is, are you familiar with They Got Acquired, the newsletter from Lexi Grant? It's about SaaS, mostly SaaS companies that get acquired. And she just talks about from basically the bootstrap founder. Yeah, it's a cool newsletter. It's about a bootstrap founder who built this business and then sold it. And then so she kind of dives through the whole process and sometimes interviews the founder, the former founder, once they've sold it, and talks about it. But her point was with her newsletter is she was able to sell for a list of only about 1,000, 1,200 subscribers. She was able to sell ad spots for like $5,000 because this was a few years ago, mind you. Maybe the dynamics and the economics have changed.
I'll leave that part out of the clip.
Okay. That being said, I mean, she had a really intent list. They're mostly CEOs, executives, people who are interested in buying companies, right? So she had an audience that was very valuable to her advertisers. So I guess my point is, you don't necessarily need a big list, depending on a few different factors. Now you can also make millions of dollars with 10,000 subscribers because you're selling, digital products or expensive consultation packages or productized services, all that sort of stuff. You don't need 500,000 subscribers to make 6-7 figures in revenue to do that. So it really depends on how you're going to monetize the newsletter.
Do you have any? This is a specific question. Any creators or businesses that do the productized service newsletter really well?
Ooh. Probably, but I'm just drawing a total blank.
Yeah, sorry, man. It'll come back to you. And one thing I like to do when I onboard clients is I'll ask the same question twice in the same conversation, just because this comes back around. Who are some people that you like? You want mood board style. This is half art, half science. There's a lot that I just know is the right thing to do for who your business is, who your customers are, what we should do in the newsletter. But half of it is art, right? It's I make a little PowerPoint slide with pictures of stuff that makes me feel a certain way. And you go, yes. And you go, no.
Yeah.
And some of that's just, how we approach feeling like we understand your voice and things like that. We have some techniques that are a lot more deterministic and others that are a bit more touchy-feely. And anywho, that's just something I like to do. So maybe I'll ask you the exact same question in a couple of minutes and you'll be like, aha.
Okay.
It's come to me. So, but I actually should probably write it down for my own sake. But it doesn't have, and then, or sometimes someone says something, related that's similar. Like, this guy doesn't know product or service, but I know he does X, Y, Z. And that's, quite similar. Question I love asking on these interviews, you personally, what's been the most impactful piece of content that you've created for yourself? That could be measured by, it's very simple. This is the tweet that got the most retweets or likes or impressions.
Right.
Or it could be, this is the issue of my newsletter that I sent that got, usually I get 3 replies for every 1,000 sends. And sounds like, this is great. Thanks for sending it. But this one was like way outlier. Everyone was like, wow, more of this. Anything come to mind for like highest impact piece of content you've created within your own ecosystem?
Yeah, that is a good question. I think my pinned tweet is definitely one of the, for good reason, I guess, because it's one reason it's the pinned tweet that I have in my profile, but that is one of my more popular tweets or has garnered the most impressions. And I wasn't always my pinned tweet. It just it kind of did that thing where it sort of kept getting, likes and shares. And so I just was like, maybe I should actually pin this one. So I won't go into detail. You can check it out at my Twitter handle is @growthcurrency. It's obviously about talking about newsletters, but that's one. I think another one that I shared, it was a tweet, and I think I turned it into an article as well because of the feedback I got on it. And I think I compared newsletters to blogging and why you basically shouldn't don't start a blog, start a newsletter kind of thing. And the irony is that, a newsletter is a blog you're just sending to people, for the most part, right? You're just, the benefit with the newsletter is you have direct access to that channel as opposed to a blog where you're relying on SEO and people to return to visit, and RSS feeds for blogs are dead. So it's kind of, not a dead medium because people still can do it well. But it's just, newsletters are so much easier to start, especially the democratization of it with Substack and, coming on board, basically having this out of box, product for people to start and grow a newsletter, and publish and grow a newsletter. So, that tweet did well. And I got some blowback from somebody who is big in the blog space, who was he actually wrote, he's a keynote speaker at conferences, and he caught wind of this tweet and he wrote not a scale, in jest, I think to some degree, reply, I'm going to start a newsletter that only my mom and my, sister's dog read, kind of thing. He's like, blogs make no money and you should never start one, in irony. And so that one got a lot of good blowback, and from both sides, right? The people came to my defense, and this guy DM'd me saying hey, I didn't mean anything bad by this. If you're ever around, we should go for a beer, kind of thing. But it was good content, I think, for both sides.
One question I always ask during my onboarding calls as well is, what are some of the controversial opinions that you have, right? Some of that's just so I don't avoid saying the opposite of their opinion, right? So if I'm writing for a client in the Bitcoin space and they're we are pro Bitcoin and every other crypto can kick rocks.
Right.
And then I write them the newsletter that's why you need to be, the newsletter's if you're not buying Ethereum, you're an idiot. And then they'll get back to me and they're you're fired. So I try to avoid that. But half of it is leaning into, the polarizing, because it's about the people finding that enthusiastic yes and that strong resonance. Mm-hmm. So putting out those hot takes, a lot of people are fearful of doing that. And then I think that's something in my own creator journey, and part of me wants to cringe when I say that, but in my own journey putting content on the internet, which has taken, which I've been doing for a long time. I've published articles online in 2018, so I've been publishing online for 6 years. And the point is, everything that you say that's spicier, if you mean it, is that's always in my top performing content. Yeah. Is let me speak my mind. This is frustrating me. This is something I don't care who I'm going to piss off when I say this. It's just got to get out. And then suddenly it just performs better. So it's not the only angle. That becomes dangerous when that you become the one trick pony who's I only know how to make people angry and I don't know how to do anything else useful. Yeah.
Rile up the posse who agrees with me and then piss off the people who don't, kind of thing. That's, I think that's why that content works. And part of the reason that people do it is, for that reason. I think, Wes Cow has that spiky point of view that she kind of coined. And I think it's important to have those. I just don't think you shouldn't be leaning on them all of the time, because that can be like, one, kind of annoying to read. And there's enough people in the world like that who, yeah, I'm not going to get into any political. Anyway, there's enough people in the world like that. So like, yes, have your spiky points of view, have your hot takes, if you will, hills that you'll die on, so to speak. But I don't think that that doing that all the time is super beneficial. But I think it's important to have a few, because if you're just vanilla and
Yep.
nobody wants to go to the ice cream shop and have vanilla ice cream. Like, you want some flavor, you want something different, some texture. So
Some texture.
yeah,
How to add texture to your newsletter. That's the
exactly.
title.
Yeah, add some texture. A little rocky road.
I love it. What are some quick wins? Someone comes to you, obviously it depends what their sophistication is, but someone comes to you, what's like a checklist of some things that you're like, the double opt-in is probably one of them, or like thinking through that strategy. What are some other things that you're like, I'm going to check in this real quick? So they already have a newsletter, let's say. Like, what's your quick mental audit, quick wins?
Yeah. So the double opt-in is one. Going through, like I mentioned earlier, the welcome sequence. Like, are you, again, engaging everybody the same way? If so, let's fix that, please. Another one would be like
welcome sequence. That's key.
Yeah. Cleaning your list pretty frequently. So like, depending again on where the subscribers are coming from, every 30 days, if they're more organic subscribers that found you and signed up on your homepage or on your sign up page, then maybe every 90 days kind of thing. Those are a few just from a kind of operational standpoint. But with content, it's really hard to be like, do this, don't do this, because people love reading short 2-sentence emails and people love reading 20-minute long emails in the newsletters, right? So it's really hard to be, I guess, objective with that kind of feedback. It really depends on, I would say, metrics that they're bringing in, open rates, click rates, and all that sort of stuff. So if they're like, hey, I'm not getting any opens, or my opens are just going down, 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 and I see that their newsletters like way too long, or their subject lines really suck, or they're just not doing a good job in one of those areas, then that would be a red flag that I'd lean on. So every situation, I've done a few newsletter audits, I've done quite a few 1 hour or half-hour calls with people, and every time I hop on the phone with somebody, it's a unique problem. It's like, hey, I want to grow or I want to monetize, of course, right? But there's always like, oh, you could be doing this a little bit differently, or you could be doing this a little differently. So it's interesting that it's like, you're basically typing an email and sending it to people, but there's so many different intricacies in there that that can affect how it works.
Yeah, I get this question on sales conversations quite a bit. They're like, well, what do you think? Like, what's working right now? And I'm like, it's one of those really tough questions. It's like, what's working is good content, and I hate like giving a non-answer like that. And you're helping me clarify my own thinking on this. And what's working is starting, right? What doesn't work is not sending anything, right? That doesn't work. Having no presence, having no pulse, that doesn't work. And then not looking at your data, that's the other thing you don't want to do as well, because it's exactly what you said. There are newsletters, you reflect on your own behavior. And this is another point I wanted to make earlier that you also kind of helped me come up with, is people don't consider, it's a fallacy of like forgetting to think about the one-on-one interaction that's happening when you are thinking about something that's scalable, right? So when you're talking about sending an email to someone who doesn't really have much context, it's like if you started a conversation with a stranger, you wouldn't just start out with like did you know that 5 days ago, like you wouldn't approach a stranger and like if the Apple just announced that breaking news in ChatGPT, you'd be like, hey dude, nice to meet you. I'm Lewis. We met at this thing the other day. By the way, here's this conversation. It's in the same thing about like just thinking about on the one-on-one basis, like what is this individual person's journey like, and losing sight of those fundamentals. I guess the other point I was getting into, something people say all the time about like written content being dead. It's like, okay, well, like people still read books. Books are going crazy. And, I get emails that if it's interesting to the person reading it, there's no limit on how much they're going to be interested. But it's just thinking through the value. So,
yeah, no, it's totally true. I think you nailed on the head when you said at the beginning, like, step one, create good content, because there's so much mediocre
I would say create content because you don't even know what good is yet.
What's that?
Sometimes you don't even know what good means yet in your space. So it's like create content, put effort into it.
Yes.
Like create like non-low effort content.
Yeah. Yeah. Don't, that would be the kind of going back to that question of like, people in your DMs, like, hey, should I start a newsletter? It's like, yes, but not if you're not willing to try to create the good content, figure out what works, what's resonating with people. I think we've all been, what's a good way to say this? Like, we've never been this subscribed to this many newsletters, probably as a society ever. I think that's probably safe to say. There's probably more people writing newsletters than ever before. So that attention in the inbox is going to be that much harder to get and that much more valuable to acquire. And I don't even mean like cost. I just mean like when you open your email, unless you've got a really robust filtration system or you're using something like Superhuman, or if that's the right, I think it's Superhuman, the email.
I use Superhuman.
Platform. Yeah, I don't, but I've heard great things. And
that's nice.
Like unless you have something like that where you're really filtering out any kind of spam, it's going to be hard to get those people's attention and get that regular open. So if they see your name in their inbox and they know like, hey, his last edition was amazing, or her content is always great, I'm opening this, or she always writes long editions, but I'm going to save it because I know it's worth my time. I'm going to read it on the weekend. You want to ingrain those habits and get people accustomed to sort of what to expect with your content too. So there's so many different facets with newsletters. We could go on for hours with how to do them and how not to do them. But starting is a really important step.
Yeah. You can't skip that step.
Nope, you cannot.
Yeah. Last couple of questions here. I know we're coming up on the time we had scheduled. We discussed beginner mistakes. So I always like to ask people, this is like my favorite, if someone's listening to this like this, we have the kind of distortion of time in terms of me creating these podcasts. So like someone listening to this, maybe like they're going back to back to back, like this episode. And I'm like, I just heard him say that. Then I heard him say it again. And then me, it's like, maybe I haven't done a podcast in 6 days. So I haven't said this in 6 days. But to them, they're like, I just heard this like 20 minutes ago on a different interview. But the whole imposter syndrome thing, and this is circling this way back to a question. I learned this from Dickie Bush, is the cure to it is simply just giving advice to your former self, is because that's something that like you just know. Like you feel imposter syndrome when you're trying to speak on something you shouldn't be speaking about, perhaps. Like maybe it's not an incorrect feeling. So then find things instead that you can speak confidently about. And everyone can confidently speak about things that they wish they did differently, or things that they wish they knew at a certain point in their life. And so that's just that random piece of advice. But to you specifically, and the way that you turn that question from one piece of content to infinite pieces of content is just like changing that to different intervals in time. So what I wish I knew 10 years ago, what I wish I knew like 5 years ago. And then you put yourself in the specific shoes of where you were. Because 9 years ago, you were in this job. 7 years ago, you were in this job. And this kid was born, but this kid wasn't. So it's like you changed it slightly. And you look at your calendar from that month and you're like, oh, that was when I went on that vacation. And that was the vacation where I worked all the time. And I should have had a writer, or I don't know. I'm getting really specific. So anyway, this year specifically, we're in August 22. And I've just exposed myself. August 22nd of 2024. What's something Jan 1 of this year, or something you've learned since this year in the newsletter space? So not the stuff you learned right at the beginning, but something that this year, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 years into your newsletter evolution, it's like, this has been my 2024 newsletter learning.
Okay. This might be a spicy. No, this probably won't be too spicy. Or spiky. One thing that I was kind of ingrained in me a little bit was, paid recommendations. The one thing that I mentioned that we do at SparkLoop was that basically there's no, I guess, negative experience with that. And I do think that there's a lot of positive that can come from using them as somebody who's trying to grow their newsletter. But what I have found is that just anecdotally with people that I've talked to and people who are getting, and not just SparkLoop, just any software that is basically pushing out
recommendation based.
Yeah, and even free. Like there's the Creator Network for ConvertKit, where there's a lot of creators who are just sending free recommendations over to everyone. Those subscribers are genuinely a little bit more asleep at the wheel, so to speak.
Okay.
They're not as engaged typically, and that's where I'm not saying don't do it or don't participate in that forum, but just make sure that you are really locking down how you're welcoming those people and how you're cleaning your list with those people, how you're tagging and segmenting those subscribers, because they are probably going to engage a little differently than somebody who is just like saw your Twitter post, loved the content, went to your profile, clicked your link, signed up for your newsletter.
Yeah,
what I'm
that guy's
getting
a
at,
bit
right?
warmer.
Yeah,
Exactly.
just a little bit, right? So, just I think there's a place for these recommendations. You just have to be really thoughtful about how you're approaching them when they do arrive. So I guess that's one, and that's probably the main one. Nothing else has really come to mind. The space has been it's been growing and evolving, but
Yeah.
in the last 8 or 9 months, there hasn't been a ton that's like kind of done a 180 or on any thoughts or notions that I had on the space. Maybe with the exception of just open rates and click rates being less trustworthy than obviously they were a few years back. So that's another one, but I'm not really giving any really spicy or interesting takes. So I'll let you cut me off here.
Hey, I'll say this, and this is a lot of been my premise with this business and a lot of my journey, right? I don't like to pitch like I'm going to do all this crazy wizardry you've never even thought of. Like I'm going to come in here and like use some software from Eastern Europe that's crazy and does some stuff, and you're not going to believe what's going to happen. It's like, no, dude, like you got to be consistent. It's business. Some businesses like Disneyland, I guess, and I don't mean to bring up Disneyland, but it's a very controversial place. Disney is the subject of controversy these days. Always.
Oh wow, I did not know.
Anyway, Disney, the point of their business is to make things fun. Like the point of, a lot of what I do with marketing is like, it's like very results driven, right? I mean, like fun's great, but the point of being in business is oftentimes like achieve the business outcome. And that just means showing up consistently with something good. Like, and maybe that's all there is to the story. So sometimes, the wise non-answer is like, yeah, you've learned some tactical things, but you're just understanding. I feel like half of maturity is just understanding things that you can't ignore. It's like, okay, that's not like if I want results, I need to do this like annoying thing. Like you've probably known the whole time, like the higher quality subscribers, the better, the more segment, the better. And it's just being like, damn, I keep ignoring that at my own peril. And that's just what it is. So it's just learning, it's realizing the things that you were told at the beginning and knew the whole time, just realizing there's like just fully internalizing the cost of ignoring them.
Yep, that's a good way to put it. It's pretty spot on. I think those subscribers, like you said, that are coming through social media after you post a great thread or a meme or whatever it is, those are the ones who are going to stick with you more than likely the longest. Yeah, you're going to get some who come through the paid or the recommended channels who will be like, oh, this is actually pretty great, I didn't realize, and will stick with you. But they're a lot harder to convert, the colder, they're colder subscribers, right?
Yeah. Well, dude, I'm glad we had this chance to reconnect. It's been a while since our last chat, so glad we made this happen. You've got a lot of valuable content about everything, going in more depth about everything we've discussed today. I swapped mid-conversation. I mean, some people will be listening to this on pure audio, but I renamed yourself from newsletter strategist to put your at right there on the name card.
Nice.
So at Growth Currency on Twitter. The website, I had it pulled up right here as well, growthcurrency.net. Anywhere else we should be telling people to check you out if they want to keep learning newsletter strategy?
Those are the best spots. You can follow me on LinkedIn as well, just with my name, if you want. But those are the primo locations where you will find me.
Amazing. I appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on.
Sweet. Thanks, Liz.